the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longs after thee. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee.
Hello dear friends, once more welcome to our next session of the Bible study. Okay, now we go to the books of Kings and the introduction to the themes and also the way the story is narrated. First of all, with regard to the outline of the books, there are 4 sections, we can say. One, the first section is the epilogue to the succession narrative, and that is chapter 1 and 2 of First Kings. And the second part, the history of Solomon. And this history is given in the First Kings chapters 3 to 11. And there we find Solomon's history is narrated in detail. And the third part, the history of the divided monarchy. That is, we know after the story of Solomon, after his rule, the kingdom was divided into Israel and Judah. And that story we find from chapter 12 of First Kings up to chapter 17 of Second Kings. And there we find the history of the divided monarchy. That means the 2 kingdoms, Israel and Judah. And the history of these kingdoms are narrated parallelly or in parallel. And therefore we can say this is the third part, history of the divided kingdom. And the fourth is the history of Judah alone. And 2 Kings chapter 18 to 25. And in chapter 25 we find the final destruction of Jerusalem, and the people end up in exile in Babylon. And thus the history of the kingdoms of Judah and Israel narrated in the book of Kings is complete. Therefore, this is the general outline of the 4 books. Okay. Now, with regard to the detailed structure and so on, if you refer to any commentary, we will get it. Okay. Here, I'm not going to narrate about it. Of course, when we go through the text, we will come across it. And when we study this history, there are some problems that we will encounter here. And one is regarding the chronology, that is, the time of the rule of the kings. And here the problem is mainly because of one factor. We know when a king reigns, there will be also the rule of the crown prince. And crown prince means the one who takes up the rule while the king is still ruling. But he is not having independent power, but he is just like a co-ruler. He rules the nation or the kingdom together with his father who rules. Okay, and what is the problem here? Here we can see sometimes when the length of the reign is narrated, for example, the king of Judah, a certain king, is said to have ruled for 20 years. Whether that 20 years is commuted or taken as his own rule or including the rule as a regent, as a crown prince. Suppose he had ruled 3 years as a crown prince and 20 years as by himself, then according to the Bible, we will find sometimes that he ruled for 23 years. But 3 years he was ruling as a regent, or as a, we can say, as a crown prince, not independent rule. But when the length of the rule is taken, it will be given as including both. But in some cases, it will not be given. Only the rule of only the independent role of the king. And hence, there's a confusion with regard to the chronology, especially about the time of the rule of the kings given in the book. Therefore, whether it is including the time of rule as crown prince or the independent rule, that is a problem. Okay, secondly, there is a problem that is called anachronism. Okay, anachronism means going beyond the times. Ana means without or beyond, and so on in Hebrew. And anachronism, it means, or it can be explained like this. We know, for example, India has a capitalist economy together with a socialist economy now. Earlier, India had a purely socialist economy. And the principles behind the governing government and the importance they give to the public sector and private sector are totally different. And if somebody is going to analyze the rule of the present day government in comparison with the rule of Jawaharlal Nehru in the 1950s, it will not be a proper comparison, because we cannot measure the government of today with the government of the Nehruvian time, because ideals were different, programs were different, emphasis given were different. Hence, we can say it is an anachronism to judge a present-day government by the standards or comparing it with the government at the time of Nehru or our former Prime Minister. And therefore we can see the comparison should have a real basis, an equality, based on which we can compare. If there is no basis for equality, comparisons will not be reasonable, and it can even be misleading. And therefore this is called the anachronism. And third is a problem regarding the political importance of the person. We know the political importance of the kings whose history is narrated in the Bible is not true to history, we can say. Some of the kings whose history is narrated in very brief might have been more important politically in those times. But the eyes of the biblical writer, the importance of that king may be very less. Because we find, for example, only two kings, Hezekiah and Josiah, are extolled as the best kings. But they were not the best politically. It is sure. But still, according to the Bible, they are the best. And that is why we say this problem of political importance is there. And the importance that we find given in the Bible may not be true to fact. And next problem is the history in the Bible is an unrealistic history. We know the history narrated in the Bible is historical in the core, in the center. But it may not be true when we take the details. Details will be exaggerated. And the same example, we can take the role of King Josiah. Even though the king, his rule is extolled, it is not the real history with due importance to each event. And therefore we can say, to some extent, unrealistic history is presented in the books of the Bible. But the central points are of course there, and that we are to accept. The details may differ, and that difference is mainly due to the importance given to such a particular person by the author. It is the editorial work we can see, and therefore we are not to be worried about it, but we should be aware of this fact. And the fifth, we can say, it is regarding the sin of Jeroboam. Yeah, Jeroboam committed the sin of idolatry, and this sin is attributed to him. When it is said he committed idolatry and he made the entire Israel to commit idolatry. It is true. But there are people who ask a question like this: did not Aaron do the same when Moses went up to the mountain and he did not come back even by 40 days? The people became impatient, and Aaron, at the pressure of the people, collected their ornaments and made practically a golden calf. And people began to worship it as a form of Yahweh, of course. That also was idolatry. Of course, we have to remember, even when it is said, nobody accepted that. And that is why Moses got angry and threw the tables at the idol and destroyed the idol. So also the tablets on which the 10 commandments were written also got destroyed. Therefore, even though such a thing occurred, sin remains a sin. It cannot be watered down or mitigated. This is what we can see. And therefore, these are some of the important problems that we face as we go through the book. You can see. And generally speaking, we find a narrative frame for the stories narrated here. And we can see that this narrative framework fits well to the stories in the books of Kings. It's a continuous story of a kingdom, and all the intrigues, problems and other difficult situations that may arise, all these are taken into account. Therefore, this we find here. And when we go through this narrative frame, we find, especially when we see the history of the divided kingdom narrated in parallel, there will be always a method that is followed. And we can think of it in this way. The kings of Judah and kings of Israel are narrated in more or less the same way. But kings of Judah will be given more prominence. That is how it is narrated. And we can ask, how is a king of Judah introduced into the story, into the narrative? And with regard to the king of Judah, the following points are mentioned. We can see, first of all, the date in relation to the king of Israel. And we know it is the king of Judah that is introduced. And when that is introduced, we'll find it is in comparison with the king of Israel. Hence, when it is said, so and so began to rule in Judah, it will be mentioned in such and such year of the reign of the king of Israel, so and so began to rule in Judah. Therefore, the date of accession to the throne is given in relation to the king of Israel. The first thing. Second, the length of the reign. He ruled for 20 years or 25 years and so on. And the third, the place of residence. Jerusalem was his capital, or who He ruled from Jerusalem. He ruled from Samaria. Things like that. Here we are speaking about the kings of Judah, and therefore he reigned from Jerusalem, it will be said. Then the age of the king at the time of his accession, it will be clearly said he was 22 years old when he became the king, or 25 years old. And then the name of the father is given always. So and so was his father. And also the name of the queen mother. Name of the father and the mother will be given. And sometimes we also find the statement that he ruled for 20 years and died at the age of 70 or 80 and so on. And so was his successor, or so and so succeeded to the throne after him in that way. And we will also find a brief summary about the king's attitude to the Deuteronomistic laws. And saying like this, always with a comparison to King David. He did everything as his father David did. And in that way, a comparison will be given. Practically, it is an appreciation of his reign. But that appreciation may not be given to all equally. That is what we find. Therefore, how a king of Judah is introduced, we can say in these dimensions. We have already mentioned about 8 points as we see in the points here in the PPT. And according to this introduction, or the way the kings are introduced, we already mentioned based on the attitude of the king towards the Deuteronomistic law. We find there are 3 groups of kings in Judah. And the first group, only 2 kings belong to this group. And we can in a way say these 2 have full grades or A+ marks. They get the 100% marks in that way. And how do we know that? About 2 kings, King Hezekiah and King Josiah. About them it is said, a special sentence is used for them by the author. There was no such a king like him, either before him or after him. That is the qualifying comment given to these kings. To both of them it is given. There was no such a king like him, either before him or after him. And this kind of comment, which are used for Hezekiah and Josiah, show that there are only 2 kings who are fully approved by the Deuteronomistic author. And why these are approved so much? Because of their reforms, especially according to the norms of Deuteronomy. Both tried to reform the religion, destroyed the Baal worship and Baal centers, established covenant or renewed the covenant, observed the Passover and so on. And therefore we can see both these kings did everything in the best way possible. And the comments are given, for example, in 2 Kings 18 and also in 23 you find. Okay, then chapter 18 and chapter 23. Then 6 kings belong to the second group. And what is their speciality? They all are praised by the author, but with a restraint. And the words of appraisal are like this: they did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, yet the high places were not taken away. Therefore, they did everything according to the law of God, and they followed the ways of King David, their father. But at the same time, it will be said, the high places were not destroyed. And therefore, we can see the modified praise is given for the second group of kings, the 6 kings. And the third group, they are called evil, and they are severely criticized. And what is the appraisal made about them? It will be said, they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. For that is the definite statement that they are evil. They did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And hence we see, in Judah, there were 18 kings from the time of Solomon. After Solomon, we say. And out of these 18 kings, 2 were 100% good. 6, they were partly good. And the remaining 10, they were the evil ones. Therefore, this is what we find here. Okay. And according to the book of Kings, we can say the most evil king of Judah is King Manasseh. And when we read his story, we will understand the evaluation made by the biblical author is correct, because he had no care at all for the traits of Yahwism. He wanted to destroy it at any cost. Therefore, naturally, he is considered to be the most evil king in the history of Judah. Okay, in comparison with the kings of Judah, we can see a big difference in the introduction about the kings of Israel. And how are the kings of Israel introduced into the story, into the narrative framework? We can see there are only 4 points that are usually found there: the date of accession, and then the name of the capital from which he rules, the length of his reign, and a brief judgment on the king's character. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Okay, therefore, this is the way we see the kings of Israel introduced into the story. Now let us take the example for the same. You can refer to the book of 2 Kings, chapter 14, verse 1 onwards. In the 2nd year of King Joash, son of Joahaz of Israel, King Amaziah, son of Joash of Judah, began to reign. Okay, therefore, the date in relation to the king of Israel, length of the reign, then, here the name of the father and is given. Then, his age. He was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. Therefore, length of the reign and also the place of his rule. His mother's name was Jehoiadin of Jerusalem, therefore name of the queen mother. And then we find an appreciation about his brief summary of the king's attitude. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord, yet not like his ancestor David. In all things he did as his father Joash had done, but the high places were not removed, and people still sacrificed and made offerings on the high places. Then, now let us take chapter 13 of 2 Kings and how the kings of Israel are introduced. In 13, we find, in the 23rd year of the king Joash, son of Ahaziah of Judah, Jehoahaz, son of Jehu, began to reign over Israel in Samaria. He reigned 17 years. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and followed the sins of Jeroboam son of Nebat, which he caused Israel to sin. He did not depart from them. And there we find the date of accession, name of the capital, and the length of the reign, and a brief judgment on his character. And therefore we see the kings of Judah and Israel are compared, but more details are given about the kings of Judah than the kings of Israel. That's what we can see. And how or why the evaluation is made? Evaluation is made for the sake of the people, to make them understand the contributions of the king. And what is the criterion or the basis for evaluation? And basically we can say it is the Deuteronomistic principles. And when we see the Deuteronomistic principles, naturally it is based on that every king is evaluated. If he follows the Deuteronomistic norms, he is a good king. If he doesn't follow, he is an evil king. In short, this is what we can say about it.
All-powerful God, give us the wisdom to discover you, the intelligence to understand you, the diligence to seek after you, the patience to wait for you, eyes to behold you, and a life to proclaim you, through the power of the Spirit of Jesus, our Lord. Amen.